Welcome to the Woodward Chronicles. This series is dedicated to honoring the legacy of Mr. Ronald Woodward, who served as Wabash County Historian from 1981 to 2025 and was awarded the title of Wabash County Historian Emeritus by the Indiana Historical Society. Mr. Woodward shares Wabash County's recorded history in his own words. Each episode invites us to listen, learn, and reflect on the rich stories from the past. Settle in. We're glad you're here.
What I wanted to start with today are these are the first inhabitants that we know of Wabash County.
They're fossils.
And they are fossils of what's called a straight nautiloid. Nautiloids generally are the seashells that you see, and they're generally circular, but these were straight. This one is 27 years old, this much of it that we can see. And each one of these lines is a year's growth.
Oh my gosh.
And what they looked like, they had a hard, long shell that tapered, as you can see, it tapers. Some of them got to be quite large. Mm-hmm. And it was the main predator of Wabash County maybe 80 million years ago. They would swim the seas, and anything that moved, they would eat. Their head came out of the top end, and it looked like a squid.
Gross.
With tentacles coming out from its head.
Sounds hideous.
And they would use those to grab their prey and eat them. All of these are from Wabash County, and they're all different individuals. And as you can see, they're different sizes and shapes. If this one is 27 years old, this part would have been a creature who was approximately 60 years old. If this is the size of this, then this creature could have been almost as long as this room, with its head protruding out of the large opening here.
Yeah.
The head would have protruded, and it would have looked like a squid, and the head probably would have been about 6 inches in size, and then tentacles, as many as 10 to 12 tentacles coming out from the head, would have been maybe a foot long, or longer, and they would have captured their prey, pulled it back into the mouth, and eat it.
What? So they were carnivores?
Oh, they were carnivores. Oh, they ate anything that was in the ancient seas that covered Wabash in that early period of time, roughly 60 million years ago. In that ancient sea, Hanging Rock was a coral reef. So it formed as a coral reef.
It was submerged. LaGros, that part was completely underwater, right?
Underwater, just like Wabash was. All of Wabash County was under roughly 90 to 100 feet of water. And the interesting thing about it is this. Coral reefs only form where the water is a certain temperature, in the high 70s. And where you have high 70s water temperature would be along the equator. And of course, the equator has moved over time before it settled where it's at now. But what that tells us is that at one time, Wabash County was very much like the Bahamas.
That's so weird to think about.
I know, that's what's unusual, and that's why I wanted to introduce you to this straight nautiloid.
How do I spell that, Mr. Woodward?
Nautiloid? Well, I'm not sure I even know, but
straight,
N-A-U-T.
Like L-O-I-D, not Lloyd?
Yes, nautiloid.
And you said straight.
Right. This one's a straight nautiloid. Okay. And he loved anything. He particularly liked sea creatures that had hard shell bodies. He had a beak on his mouth that could crunch their shells and then swallow whatever meat was inside the shell.
And you said each of the rings is a year old. So that was a younger one, right?
This one's only 27 years old, and each ring that you see here, that shows a year of growth. he would start here, move to there, then move and keep moving. And each time he moved, there'd be a membrane that would stretch across there and create an airlock so that he could use the air trapped inside his body to go up and down like a submarine would.
Yeah.
And they were very quick. And their favorite food was trilobites. You've probably heard of trilobites before. And in Wabash County, I've seen trilobites as big as 6 inches.
I thought you were being funny. I have no idea what a trilobite is.
Oh,
Is that a fish?
A trilobite is a small creature that lived at the bottom of the sea, looked very much like, it not really looked like it, but was similar to a crab. It didn't have any feelers or claws, I should say. It didn't have claws like you see today, but it laid on the bottom of the sea and would move around and eat the waste that had been dropped by other fish from when they had eaten a fish or something.
Yeah, like they were bottom feeders.
Right, bottom feeders, exactly right. And he particularly liked them. And yeah, I found 7 different individuals in Wabash County, mainly in Wabash and Charlie Creek Park.
Oh, really?
And down at Somerset. Those are the 2 main locations. But what is interesting is that these come from a period of time when our county was underwater, and they were our first residents. And this was the lead predator of its day, eating anything that moved. He was vicious. And this is what remains of them, and we can still find them today in Wabash County. Interestingly enough, if you go down to the Somerset area, I know it's going to be hard to believe, but at another time, another epoch in our county's history, we were a desert. And you can actually find bones of things like camels and other creatures that would live in the desert that was here at one time.
You're literally blowing my mind. I knew about when the glacier started to melt, and that's what caused Le Gros and to be underwater. And when they were retracting, that's what caused, if I understand correctly, and I know you will correct me, when they started to retract, that's where we get the hills through Huntington County, those deep valleys. Had no idea parts of our county were a desert. None.
Today, we are worried about climate change. Nothing new. Our planet goes through constant changes, and we're just seeing one right now. Back in the early 1700s and even earlier, there was the fear of a mini glacial age. But the last glacier that hit here was 10,000 years ago, and it created the valleys that you see today and the hills that you see and the plain surfaces, the swamps, and all the lakes we have up in Pleasant Township. Those were all created by the glacier as it was leaving the state. That was 10,000 years ago. And they just sculpted our county as the water melted. The creeks that were created from the running water from the glacier created our valleys and helped to create the Wabash River system. And the pressure on the land had flattened it. As it retreated, it dug out a lot of areas that became our lakes, like Lucan's Lake and Long Lake. Round Lake.
When did it shift, Mr. Woodward, from salt water, right, which I'm assuming the straight Nautiloid was a saltwater creature. When did it become freshwater then?
I don't know.
Okay.
But there were several floods. There were not just one big one that happened 60 million years ago.
Sure.
There have been several times when Wabash was completely underwater. And one of the interesting things to me, how far would you say it is to Toledo?
Oh, I don't know. 300 miles, maybe?
Maybe 150, 60 miles.
Okay.
That's
so I was wrong.
No. We have our own impression of distances.
Right, sure.
But at one time, Lake Erie
Yeah.
came all the way down to Fort Wayne.
You're kidding.
We were 40 miles from Lake Erie.
About when would you guess?
Oh, roughly
Just
8,000 years
Oh,
ago.
okay. So,
And it retreated, which if you look at the land as you go up to North Manchester, you see a lot of flat land, and in some places you'll see swampy land.
Yeah.
That's all created from what was called the Black Swamp that was on the edges of Lake Erie, and it came all the way down to North Manchester. And the ancient Lake Michigan came all the way down to past Rochester. So we were close to the ancient lakes. It's geologists have studied this over time, and they've been able to delineate it. I'm not a geologist. I know just a little bit to get myself into trouble, but
or blow my mind at this present moment, to be honest.
But think about it. At that time in Wabash County, you would have been 40 miles from Lake Erie and roughly 45 miles to Lake Michigan.
That's crazy to even think about. It's crazy to think about this sea creature being here. When you hear about geologists studying hanging rock and the fossils that are embedded in the side of hanging rock, I always think of small clam shells, maybe some vertebrae of some old bones. I would have never guessed a creature of this magnitude would have lived as a carnivore here in Wabash County.
He would have loved the coral reef because with his teeth, his beak, it was a beak, he could break those coral shells open and suck out the polyps that were inside. Sure. So he would have enjoyed that. But yeah, it's tremendous to think. Hanging Rock is 80 feet tall, roughly, and there had to be at least 10 feet to 20 feet of water on top of that. So, yeah. Believe it or not, when the glacier was here, there were humans here as well. We have one mound that we know of for sure in Wabash County, and that's down to the south and west of La Fountain. There's a mound builder site there that's circular, and artifacts from it dated for 2,000 years ago. But if you go north of us, there had to have been in that swampy area that made up the Black Swamp that was connected to Lake Erie, there were hill sites, and on those hill sites, there were probably Indians, we'll call them Indians, who lived there, very paleo, prehistoric
hunter-gatherer.
Right. And we know that they trapped and hunted mastodon because we found their remains. We found the remains of 3 mastodon in Wabash County, and parts of one are now on display in the museum that you can see.
The Wabash Museum or because
Yes,
the Center for
museum.
History has a mastodon.
They have a display too, but we also have one here in Wabash at the county museum.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. We do.
Teeth, one tooth being about that size. Gosh. So they were huge, and they were trapped by the paleo hunters of this area. But the evidence we have, not only of the mastodon that were here, but there were giant ground sloths. Now, when you go to this zoo, you see a ground sloth, and he's maybe this big and very slow moving. We're talking about a creature that stood 16 feet tall.
So more the size of like a gorilla, like a silverback gorilla.
Even bigger.
Oh, okay.
Even bigger.
Grizzly bear? In my mind, I'm trying to give like perspective because, sloths seem so soft and slow and cuddly. So these would have been massive in size.
Right. I'm 5'10", so he would have been 3 times my size.
Okay.
And
Thank you.
Yeah. They loved eating trees. And we had a tree in Wabash County called the honey locust that developed thorns to keep the sloth from eating its leaves. And you can still find them today in the county. They'll have thorns maybe this long that extend out and very sharp, and they will grow up along the side of the tree. And they're an ancient protection from those giant ground sloths that were here up to 8 and 10,000 years ago. Plus, in the Rowan and in the Urbana, particularly in the Urbana area, we've located paleo spears that were this size, huge in size, that were used to kill the mastodon and also any other creatures that might have been here as well, that the Paleo Indian wanted to eat.
When you think about how they teach history now, because that's, part of your expertise as you were a history teacher as well as our county historian, it feels like there's a disconnect. Like I feel disconnected when you hear about mastodons and you hear about paleo gather hunter Indians, early man in this area. You don't ever think about it being right here in Wabash County. I don't know, for some reason, I think it's happening out west or somewhere in the Plains region, but it's true. Those things exactly happened here in Wabash County. We are just a part of that evolution in this county as the rest of the world was. It just looked maybe a little bit different based on location to equator and so forth. Those artifacts, though, that you have found, so all of the ones you brought with you today were ones you have found. You said that there's a mastodon on display at the Wabash County Museum. There's a mastodon and some of those old artifacts on display at the Center for History in North Manchester. Is there another place other than those two locations in your private collection of others that have collected, like you said, some hunting spears or any of those old artifacts that have them in our community that you know of? Or those kind of besides your private collection, those would be the only two kind of public places that house those?
In Wabash County, those two, the Center for History and the County Museum, are the two main sources. North Manchester University may have some, I don't know, in their geology department. If I were to recommend a place to go, I'd recommend Ball State University. In their archaeology department, they have a museum in which they have artifacts that they have found, some from Wabash County, but from around the state, from their digs, that tell our early history. But I'm not the only one who collects these. I collect them to use as a teaching tool and to bring history more to life for an individual.
Yeah.
You now know what a straight Nautiloid was. And that he lived in Wabash County and that he was a predator. And you could see what one envisioned, what one looked like. So to me, it's a teaching
size.
tool.
Well, yes, because I get a kind of a visual of how big, if that parts of it were that large, how big its head and the rest of it got. Do you have any idea, estimated lifespan? And I should have asked you that, of one of those Nautiloids.
I really don't know.
Okay.
I don't know. This one the large one that I showed you, I'm going to assume that he was 3 times the size of the large one. So he was about 3 times as old. So he'd have been about 60 years old, that one. But this indicates that there might have been a mass extinction of them. And why they would have died could have been that the seas were drying up. The Earth was tilting a little bit more on its axis. I don't know for sure.
Sure.
But there are a lot of people who collect fossils and prehistoric artifacts and historic artifacts in their own private collection. Right now, a lot of people don't want to talk about having them because of our social environment right now of Indian remains, Indian finds. Should you even collect them? Should they be returned to the tribes? Should they go to another facility, a museum just for Native Americans? There's a whole bailiwick of problems that associate themselves with it.
Sure.
Plus, there are people out there who are not really, they're collectors, but they're not collectors to teach or to educate. They look for the value of them. If, for instance, you had a birdstone right now, would not be unusual to pay $1,000 to $2,000 for a birdstone. What we normally call an arrowhead, I call a projectile point, and those can be valued. Small ones can be valued from $10 on up to an unimaginable price. So a lot of people are very reluctant
Mm-hmm.
to share that they have collections.
What was a birdstone?
A birdstone was we're not exactly sure of its purpose. I believe it was used as a weight for an atlatl, ATL. That was a spear.
Oh.
And on the back of it, they would attach a spear, and that would enable them to throw a projectile, a spear point, at a faster rate of speed that it could penetrate a large animal like the giant sloth or like the woolly mammoth. And believe it or not, a man could get a spear going about 40, maybe more miles per hour by using this atlatl. And that's what a lot of people think the birdstone. It was shaped like a bird, and they would take sandstone and form it into the image of a bird. And they take different shapes, and they seem to be, that's what they seem to have been used for. But again, we don't have any written records.
Sure. They weren't documenting it on their recording devices
No,
and their cameras.
They were worried about living.
Yeah, they weren't posting on Instagram. Okay.
But
yeah, sure.
There's value to them today, and there are people who, if they know of an Indian site, will go out and dig it up and take whatever they find. And in doing so, they ruin the history for us because that site tells us about the life of those people. And in Wabash County, for instance, the Miami Indian, they buried their dead in several different ways. One was to take a small cave or hole in the side of a creek bank, bury them in there, and then stack rocks up to close it off. And inside, they would bury them with their possessions that were important to them in their lifetime and their clothing. That was one way of doing it. So those remains have been found, and some people have opened them up and taken what they found. Even as late as the 1980s, there was a case where a Native American cemetery was found along the Mississinawa, and in this case, one of the Indians buried there had met George Washington and had been given a peace medal, and they managed to get that and have it in their private collection.
An individual found it and has now kept that. Okay.
Yes. When that was found out, the Corps went out, covered the cemetery with riprap, large stones, to keep people from going in again.
The Army Corps of Engineers?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. So there's stuff to be found out there, and it tells us about the life of the county.
And what the quality of life was like by the tools, by the instruments like the birdstone that they used, and how they, like you said, to survive, to feed their families and to feed themselves, and even how they were buried and preserved, also tells you whether it was an indigenous people. And as more settlers came, which was much, much obviously thousands of years later, just how different populations and groups of people were at that different point, different groups of people and populations where they were in that point in history and part of their cultural story.
Yeah.
Do you have any idea how long or how many different Native American tribes were in Wabash County? And I guess I'm using that word too broadly because you referred to early inhabitants as Paleo Indians, kind of as that progression. What followed the Paleo? Would it have just been a natural into what we know today as referred to as Native Americans?
The earliest we know of is the upper middle Mississippian culture, which was 2,000 years ago. And that's the mound site that's down on the Mississinawa, southeast of LaFountain. And why they built it there, we don't know for sure, but they built it at the mouth of the Jesina Creek, which flows into the Mississinawa, and it was built circular. So it was either a ceremonial location for those groups of Indians or someone lived there. And sometimes they lived on a circular mound, built their cabin or I'm going to call it a cabin, but they're huts on
Mhm.
it. And when they died, they'd be buried under the floor and more dirt put on top. So it began to grow and grow and grow in size. This one has a moat around it. The moat is roughly 12 to 16 feet high. And the reason we have information about it is that a road was cut through one of the banks, and Chester Troyer managed to save some of the artifacts that were exposed at that time, and he sent them to the Glenn Black Laboratory at IU University, which is the premier location for paleohistory and archaeology artifacts in the state. Ball State has a great little museum and a great department, but Glenn Black is the premier, and they have a tremendous amount of material. And they were able to tell Chester Troyer that the artifacts he found were 2,000 years old.
Incredible.
Yeah.
It's incredible.
So that would be the only group I know of would be the upper middle Mississippian. And they like to be on a major river like the Mississinawa. Right there, it's very fast. There's some rapids there, which means there was shellfish, and they would have a source of food. Jusina Creek had fresh water for drinking. There's the remains of what looks like a fish trap above the mouth of the creek. That is, they placed boulders across the creek in order to dam it up and to keep the fish in. And they could either go out and gig them with a spear, or they could open up and let it flow into a net or a basket and catch them fresh that way. So it was a perfect location.
Are there still remnants of that there today?
You know, I'm not sure about what we call a weir, the fish dam or the weir. I'm not sure about that because the water at times when we have a lot of rain covers it.
Okay.
And may have washed some of it away. Sometimes the water can get up 8-10 feet and even cover the mound. If you want to see a fish weir, go to Laketon. At Laketon, at the bridge, there's a boat ramp for canoeing.
Okay.
From there, you can see a V shape in the river. That V shape is a weir that was created by more historic Indians that we know something about, Potawatomi, and they created it into a V. It would dam up the water and leave an opening where they could trap the fish and eat them. So that's one that is still visible today. Just go to the bridge there in Laketon, on the Laketon Road, pull over at the boat ramp, go down, you can see it, unless it's in flood stage.
And then you can't see anything.
You'll just see a little ripple.
How long ago would you estimate that fish ladder or weir in Laketon to be? How old or how long ago? Just guess, like.
Personally, I think that dates to what we call the historic Indians that were in the area. We had two tribes, one the Miami and two the Potawatomi. Both were rather late getting into this area, and they were pushed down into this area by either the English or the French in their settlement. In the 1700s, you have both tribes here, so it is quite possible that the fish weir at Laketon may have been associated with what I'm going to say a Potawatomi village, approximately anywhere from 1700 on up to roughly the 1830s, when people began to settle that area and they had moved out. The other tribe would be the Miami, and they came here early in the 1700s, mostly settling around Fort Wayne, but some came down this way as well. And they were mainly associated with the French, but later on they associated with the British. So the British had the Miami in this area move down to Pickawilly in Ohio, little village called Pickawilly. The French didn't like that. So with their allies, Indian allies, they went down to Pickawilly and forcibly removed the Miami from there and made them come back to this area. And that was basically around 1750s.
Why? Why would the French want them to move back to this area?
Well, they wanted them as their allies. They wanted the pelts that they could deliver to them for economic reasons and security of their own land. And they saw the British as being intrusive.
Yeah.
We're talking about a period just right before the French and Indian War. And of course, the French lose power and they lose control of the Indians, and the British step into that. But the British had been trying to get the Miami interested in them for quite a while. They actually went down, the French went down with their Indian allies, massacred a bunch of the Miami, and forcibly brought them back here. And then you begin to have, along the Mississinawa, you get villages appearing that we have historical data for, like Silver Hills Village, Deaf Man's Village, Jacina's Village. Jacina is also called Medicina. His village, his son was Mishingamasiya. Mishingamasiya had his own village.
Which is what the country club in Marion used to go by. I may say it wrong.
Mishingamasiya.
Yeah, they named their country club after that for years. So that makes sense now. I didn't realize that.
Yeah, and all that area along the Mississinawa from Jalapa on up to the mouth of Jacina, well, actually to Old Somerset was all Miami. And then became Mishingamasia's reservation, which disappeared in 1879. Every tribal member, and there were about 400 some odd families, were all given portions of land that they could settle. And from there, it began to dissipate and go into hands of other people.
It's shocking to think how all of this land belonged to those natives and how much has been reduced in just the United States itself to such small portions of where Native Americans who have lineage for hundreds of years and now just rest in such small areas when all of this used to be theirs to care for, right? Before we came in, white man came in and took it over.
And it's left problems for us today. But there's two ways of looking at it. We did pay them. It may not have been as much as it should have been.
Yeah.
We paid them. They signed treaties. The Treaty of Paradise Spring opened up a vast amount of land. There were other treaties that opened up even more land. They even signed treaties to allow themselves to be removed to Oklahoma. Those that stayed are now the Miami Indians of Indiana. And now you have two tribes that won't even speak to each other, but have a common heritage and have problems dealing with each other.
Which two tribes are there now? You said there are two tribes?
Oh, there's two. Actually, I shouldn't say tribes. I should say bands.
Okay.
There are two bands.
Okay.
The Miami Indians of Indiana and the Oklahoma.
Okay.
And you have to belong to one or the other. Some people belong to both. Some people won't do anything with this band. 2 weeks ago, I had a lady come into the library while I was sitting there. She wanted to do Indian research. I told her the best place to go was to Peru, to the Miami Nation headquarters. Nope, I'm a card-carrying member of the Oklahoma band, and I won't have nothing to do with them. So I couldn't help her. She didn't want to be helped by the people who have the information.
Yeah. So she got to choose.
Yeah.
She got to choose.
And they're still arguing, and I'm not sure. I'll go out on a limb. Part of the problem of moving the reenactment, part of the problem was the Miami in Oklahoma wanted to have more control over who could participate. They were demanding that you had to be a card-carrying Oklahoma Miami Indian, and it was leading to some problems for them. And they just decided to move the reenactment from government land to private land. But that site was a perfect location because that's where Medicinia's village was, Mashingamasia's village, and that was their reservation up until the 1870s.
Mm-hmm. And that location, not only historically accurate, but it was just so significant into so many people's, not only the reenactors' tradition, but from an educational standpoint for educators who took their students to that particular location.
Right.
I am grateful, though, that the annual reenactment has found a place to host the event, because it was terribly missed by the thousands and thousands that jot that date on their calendar every year to go. So
they were doing a great job out there, I thought.
Yeah.
But part of the problems may have been part of that, of their relationship between the two bands of the tribe. But that's sad. It happens. But the government every so often still gives an annuity to Miami Indians in Indiana.
Oh, really?
And they are accumulating land so that they have a visible source of land. And here in the last 20 years, the U.S. government, through congressional action, has been giving more land back to the Native Americans than we often realize. They've been giving back. The Miami here in Indiana, they wanted the county farm so they could turn it into a reservation. But there were arguments against. And so it never developed. Right now they have I'm going to call it their powwow grounds or their meeting grounds down across from Seven Pillars. And they're using that as kind of a center of their educational outreach to people and the programs that they offer, and having powwows there. Traditionally, for at least the last 70 years that I know of, the Miami tribe once a year meets in the city park and has a reunion. So they're trying very hard to retain their history and to enhance their history, to learn more about their past and become more related. Well, I'm having trouble finding the right word, but becoming more Miami Indian that had been lost. They're learning their language. And all kinds of aspects like that.
Kind of back to their roots, back to the very beginning. This is the type of people we were, and our fathers, those who came before us, were, and trying to reconnect with some of that, which has been lost. I think that's for all of us on this earth. We, especially Western culture, we truly lose any connection to who our roots are. Many of us, most of us, not all, but most who live in the West or in the United States, we're such a blend of different European cultures that we also don't have necessarily anything specific to connect back to. So that is beautiful that we're seeing that within our Native Americans in 2025 or the 2000s, where they're starting to connect back with that, because we don't want to lose that. There's beauty in that. And the perseverance of a people who lived off of the land, what the land provided. We live, I won't speak for you, Mr. Woodward. I live on the land, right? I am grateful for the grocery store or farmers markets, but those are peoples who truly lived off of the land and then taught your Westerners, new Westerners, how to survive off of the land here as well. And correct me if I'm wrong in that description.
No, you're perfectly right. And you put it right. They're searching for their roots. And one of the places that's been helping them to do that, and I mention it because Stephanie worked for them at one time, is the Minnetrista Center in Muncie. They were very early in the movement to begin to try and preserve, collect, and gather information to enhance the history of the Miami Indian in the area. And we're very early at doing that. And I believe Stephanie worked there for a period of time.
She did.
So she's more attuned to that. But at one time we had a woman who also, well, what she did was there's this misconception that Miami's lived in teepees. And
Okay, I thought all Indians, except the ones that lived in wigwams, lived in teepees. So please continue educating me, Mr. Woodward.
well, of course, there are at least 7 or 8 different types, or even more, and variations. But for some reason, we tend to think of the Miami as living in teepees when in fact they lived in wigwams, which were made of wreaths and in animal furs, or in longhouses, which we're familiar with the Algonquin people of the northeastern United States that extended down into here. And that's more of what was traditional for here. But those old customs we have that we developed from the movies
Yes.
persist. I mean, I'm not being critical here, but Wabash Apaches, I'm not being critical of the high school, but we have the Apaches. And if you look at their statue of an Apache, it is a Plains Indian in a feather headdress and buckskin all the way down. A lot of the young people who portray the mascot of an Apache, they tend to be more realistic of what an Apache may have looked like. And the school has been aware of that, and they have addressed that issue, and they don't in any way try to degrade or run down Native Americans by their mascot. They're proud of it, and they're proud of their Indian heritage and the Indian culture. But it just shows how some of the things we saw in the movies still persist as far as our impression of what Native Americans were and all. But when you think about it, we know that the upper middle Mississippian Indians were here with a mound down at LaFountain. But their main center was in St. Louis, and it had over 200,000 people in it.
How many do you think were in LaFountain, or how many do we estimate?
I can't even begin.
Okay. Small, obviously much smaller of a...
The ceremonial or housing circular mound would indicate not very many, but others may have lived out and come to it.
Yeah.
So it's very hard to tell. If you've ever been to Mound State Park down at Anderson, their mounds are fantastic, and they're large. Their great mound is roughly 20 times taller than ours, and I've never seen estimates as to how many may have lived there, but it's possible that there could have been as many as 2,000 to 5,000 who would have lived at that site. We don't know. We don't have any idea. We know about their culture. We know how it was connected to the big mound, Angel Mounds down at the Ohio River at Evansville. We know how it was connected to other mound sites, but figures, I have never seen any to really say. So it's really hard. If I were to guesstimate, maybe 100 were at LaFountain, maybe.
Yeah.
But I don't think they all lived on that mound. It would only be big enough for one hut. But spreading along the river, it's hard to tell.
What is your favorite? You're so well versed. I think I'm always just so grateful for the knowledge you share, and I mean that. That's not a platitude. I really mean that, Mr. Woodward. So I'd be curious, between prehistoric and historic, what is your favorite, or, to talk about, or to even do more research and learn on? Is there one over the other that gets you excited?
You'd want to say historic because there's more records. So I'm going to go the other route. The prehistoric.
Of course you are.
Yeah, find their remains and study them and see what they tell us, because there are secrets that need to be uncovered. And by finding more, we can tell more. Just like the fossils I showed you there, they tell us one portion of life. I have another one that shows plant life that lived in the ocean, which gives us another aspect. It just, it's so varied. So the prehistoric is, to me, more interesting. And it's the area where we're really uncovering a lot more. Every year, more information is being released through archaeological digs than ever before. And it's just enhancing our knowledge tremendously. The other day, 2 weeks ago, I was cutting the grass. A car pulled up. Young man got out. I didn't recognize him. I think he's roughly about 40, between 30 and 40, and I'd had him as a student. His name was Tim Leach. And Tim Leach came up to me and said, "Can I bother you for a minute?" And he introduced himself as Tim Leach. And I'd had him as a student way back when.
Sure.
And he wants me to go to his house. He pulled out some pictures. He's got these limestone sheets, solid, thick limestone sheets that weigh hundreds of pounds.
Yeah.
And he sees writing in it, ancient script of some sort, something like runes.
Really?
And he sees animals. And sure enough, when you look at the picture, you can see what looks like animals and what does look like runes. Now, runes are Viking language.
I wonder, assuming like
symbols of Viking, a written language, generally using straight lines. And we know that they were here before Christopher Columbus. And we know about the Kensington stone, if it's real. We know about other stones down at Brandenburg, Kentucky, and other places where it's thought the Vikings might have appeared.
Mm-hmm.
Now, he's got this flat stone, huge flat stone, that has unusual carvings.
And it's in his basement?
It's at his house.
I'm
I
sorry.
haven't been out there yet to look at it.
Maybe I filled it in that, because most of Wabash is built on limestone. So in my mind, I just filled it was in his basement. So it's at his home. Well, obviously, now we know why you didn't bring it to you. It's hundreds of pounds. So you haven't had a chance to look at it then.
I haven't had a chance to get out there.
That has to be thrilling for you.
Yeah, because he's got a puzzle here, and either it's his imagination or mine.
And yours, yeah.
That there's some kind of writing there, and that there's some kind of animals that are appearing on this. And he may have a piece of a puzzle that might help historians solve a problem of, well, we know they settled in Canada out in Nova Scotia.
Yeah.
And we think they went all the way out to Minnesota. Did they come down into Wabash County?
It fills in another potential gap.
Right.
Yeah.
And of course, it can all be our imagination that look at that stone and wanting to see. And I have to look at it and then see what we can do. And then maybe who can we contact to know more about it.
Right.
It's just a puzzle. It's a giant puzzle, and little pieces fall into place ever so often. And that's what's intriguing to me.
You have written how many books?
Oh.
That are published. I know you have a lot of manuscript. I don't know how much if all of your manuscripts have been published, but published, available to the public. How many books are there?
Roughly about 45. They've all been published. Well, several books are just sitting, never going to be published. About 45, and they've all been copied and placed in libraries and shared with other people as well.
So if somebody said, "Oh, I'd love to get some of Mr. Woodward's books," where are they available? I know the Welcome Center has your most recent published piece, but where are they all available on Amazon or?
Well, some of my works are available on Amazon.
Okay.
And some are available, as you said, at the Welcome Center. The more recent ones are at the Welcome Center. The older ones, a lot of them are cemetery inscriptions. I have gone out to every cemetery in the county that I know of and copied every gravestone that I could find. And I've put those into township books with township cemeteries, about 56 cemeteries. And then I added to that work by going to obituaries in newspapers
Mm.
and adding even more information when there weren't death dates, putting in death dates and that kind of thing. And so a lot of things are just research that nobody really wants to get into unless they have to, or they're doing family research.
Yeah.
But here lately, there've been books on the history of Wabash.
Mm-hmm.
History Press has printed 2 of my books, and History Press has now become Arcadia.
Oh, okay.
And then the others generally are locally published by local printers and available at the Welcome Center.
Mm-hmm.
I'm trying very hard to get rid of as many books as possible.
Because you have multiple copies at home?
Yes.
Oh.
So sometimes I have, if people reach out to me, I have something that they can have.
I wonder, I have purchased a lot of your books. We have a copy at home of each, but I've given them as gifts. Like my father-in-law, he doesn't live here anymore, and he always enjoys, because a lot of the places you reference in your books, he was, born in the 50s, but they have a meaning to him. He grew up in LaGrow, and then, ran around Wabash and, jumped off the cliffs at Mississinawa. So even though that your stories aren't about his specific, the things he relates to the areas that you write about. And so they're so meaningful and they're so important. So at some point I'll get with you, and I'd love to have a list of, even if you email it to me, a list of all the titles that you still have available, whether online or getting in contact with you to request extra copies. I think that would be really interesting to share, and you can tell me no, or even on your Wabash County Historian Facebook page, just because I think people don't realize the first book I ever saw you wrote, the very first one I was aware of, was The Green, 1776 to 1976,
Bicentennial history.
And I have a copy of that at home too, because that was a great reference when I first came into my role as tourism director. Doesn't mean I'm even close to a historian, but people would ask about family names and some of those obscure ones that I wasn't as aware of, like Troyer or Payne, Payn. You see a lot of that on the facades of, the parapets of the buildings downtown. So that was a great resource for me to make me do my job even better, connecting with people who came in and asked questions. Now, if I got over my head, of course, I sent them down to the museum to dig deeper. So that was one of the very first books. And then there was another book, I can't remember which one it was, but you co-authored that with Mrs. Gladys Harvey. And what was the name of that one? I can see it. It was like an Auburn spined book.
Wabash Chronicles.
Yes.
Quirky Stories of Wabash County.
And it had squirrels on the front.
Squirrel on the front.
Which I never knew that Wabash had a black squirrel stampede. I just like this. It was so well done. It is so well done that I just think people who think, oh, I've picked up this, I've got Mr. Woodward's book. You got one.
Right.
So maybe we can get together on that at some point, and if you're okay with it, and write those titles down.
There's a volume, not a volume 2, but another volume to the Wabash Chronicles. That was...
it's the one with the shorter people on the front.
The hidden history of Wabash County.
Right, and it has the shorter people on the cover.
Yes.
Yeah, I have that one too.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was a good read.
There was a third one that I've written, a third one to accompany it, but I didn't like Arcadia, the way they were editing. So I wouldn't let them release it.
So it's hidden? It's hidden at your house?
It's called The Lost History of Wabash County.
Oh, and it's Lost History is at your house because nobody's gotten to read it yet. Do we need to find you another publisher?
It's another 170 pages.
Oh.
And I just was... They didn't want me to tell some of the stories I wanted to tell. And so I just said, okay.
Well,
I don't
you're
have
not
to
the boss of me.
you.
Yeah, that's right. You're not the boss of me.
But the latest has been the Looking Back series.
And we have sold that too. We still have a handful. I think we just sold another one last month, but we have a handful of those in the Welcome Center as well.
Looking Back 1 was what I called the founding of Wabash, and it goes from prehistory up to 1899.
Okay.
Then Looking Back Volume 2 was from Square Deal to New Deal.
Yes.
Which was 1900 to 1949. And right now, I'm putting the finishing touches on my next volume, which I think I'm going to call The Atomic Age. And it'll be from 1950
Mm-hmm.
to 1999. And of course, I already have from 2000 up to today done, but I'll probably never release that in my lifetime. So I don't know. But that's been tremendously interesting to me, using the newspapers, going back and doing a chronological history of just taking stuff from the newspaper that was happening in Wabash and seeing how things develop is extremely interesting.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of times I use that for what I put on Facebook, and some of my other volumes and other works have been used to pull out and make separate, like a history of the women's clubhouse.
Oh, sure.
And other smaller portions of history that I've done in manuscripts. But it's all fun, and it enables me to learn more about Wabash County. Sometimes I learn what I don't want to learn.
Mm-hmm.
And then other times I answer questions. For instance, 20 years ago, somehow I found out that there was a nudist colony over at LeGros.
No, stop it. 20 years ago? That's not that long ago.
That I learned about it.
Oh, okay.
I've spent the last 20 years trying to find out about that place.
Okay.
Anybody from LeGros I talked to, oh, you don't know what you're talking about. I had a description of where it was. It was farm property. It was on Old 24, somewhere between Old 24, between Wabash and LeGros, past where the school and the cemetery are, that's as far as I could get. Finally, in reading a 1930s newspaper, there was an article about the nudist camp at LeGros.
That's amazing.
So it takes years sometimes to find an answer.
20 years.
Yeah, 20 years to find an answer to that. But now I know. And I have proof.
What do you remember? What newspaper was it? The local
The
paper,
Plain Dealer.
the local Plain Dealer.
Yeah.
Interesting.
But I also do go to other papers as well.
Sure.
For instance, if you want to know a lot about early Dora, Lincolnville, and LeGros, you want to go to the Andrews newspapers.
Mm.
The Andrews newspaper in the 1880s and later was run by a man by the name of Butler, who also ran the Plain Dealer before he moved to Andrews. So he spent a lot of time talking about those areas. So you learn a lot of things that you never knew and are hard to find and weren't in the local newspapers.
Mm-hmm.
And I've gone all the way to Logansport to use their newspapers. They had what they called the Potawatomi Times that was printed in the 1820s and early 1830s, before we even had a county. And they're mentioning what was going on here. So you can find bits and pieces of building of the canal,
Mm-hmm.
Who was living here, what was going on,
Mm-hmm.
in papers that you may never have thought about ever using.
Well, that makes sense, because you would think, I'm just going to search Wabash papers, but surrounding areas were covering some of those stories too. Mr. Woodward, you're not going to believe it, but we just talked for another hour and did not get to our topic.
Do you want to go to the topic?
Well, I can't today because I have this for an hour, but we're gonna.
Okay.
So, which is okay because this was super cool. And I love how easy our conversations, well, it's really me just learning, but you're just so good at sharing these stories, and you do it in such a way that it's so easy to understand and piece together. So I'm not disappointed at all at what we talked about today. That's from my heart.
Thank you.
Well, Mr. Woodward, that's been 1 hour.
Hi, I'm Ron Woodward, and these are the Woodward Chronicles. Thanks for listening.
The Woodward Chronicles podcast is made possible by the generous support of the Lisa Gilman Investment Fund, the Sandra Kunkel Trust, Mark and Amy Ford, Paperworks Industries, the Community Foundation of Wabash County, and Visit Wabash County, and is created by Destination Wabash County.